With the industry facing a number of notable challenges for 2021, we speak to Kate Clancy, the Sustainability Manager for Cargill, examining some of its key measures for tackling child labour, improving payment to farmers, and looking at its due diligence legislation, as well as exploring its role as a sponsor of the upcoming World Confectionery Conference. First up, we discuss a new Cargill survey which found that 70% of consumers are happy to pay more for product ranges that are sustainably sourced.
I think this research that you speak to, I am familiar with, and I'm aware that our marketing department undertook that. And it is quite significant because it does remind us that there is a willingness and an interest from our customers to be involved in sustainability, and they can very much involve themselves by supporting sustainable solutions in their value chain. So we as Cargill, for example, have an entire portfolio of solutions called the Promise Solutions, and they're a series of products and services that we actually offer all sizes of customers in all regions and across all different types of applications for them to come on board and invest in sustainability. And they can do that by purchasing a sustainable product, or they can get involved in a sustainability project work through some sort of additional investment. They can get more information on not only can they, by doing that, Neill, I think there's a couple of benefits for them. They can also, not only can they understand what are some of the standards and conditions under which the cocoa is produced, but they can also get information. So they can get information around where their cocoa comes from, the provenance of their cocoa. They get an understanding on the impact of the projects that they're investing in. Sort of not only are they reaching farmers and communities, but what actually is that translating to in terms of outcomes? And they can also understand how we're investing their finances, right? So we're very transparent and open about exactly the money as it comes in, where it goes, which is to our sustainability programming. And one of the, what I think is quite a cool thing or innovative thing is that we've actually set up a new portal called CocoWise. And that is something that I think you're familiar with and that you've seen. But that's through which we then share all of the deliverables with our customers and stakeholders. So we give actually access to, we give login information, and by doing that, you can come in and actually see information about, where we're sourcing our cocoa. We have quite a substantial integrated direct supply chain, under what conditions was that cocoa produced, and any additional programming that the customer chooses to support to address specific issues, whether it's issues like deforestation, addressing and eradicating child labor, or things like looking at livelihoods, right, and supporting women, young people, or farmers diversify their incomes. So I think that's definitely a way in which customers can get more involved, and I think it also speaks to the fact that consumers continue to see the need to raise standards across the cocoa value chain.
And links to the survey that just gone out there, I think it was very much highlighted that child labour was the #1 concern for consumers, and that in the recent NORC at Chicago University report that stated that there's still the case that around 1.56 million children are still in child labour in Ghana and Ivory Coast. So what do you believe are the key drivers of change in terms of really getting impact on that?
So, I mean, as Cargill, we don't tolerate child labor in our supply chain, and it's something that we've been working on for a number of years, right? But if I'm going to speak very candidly, I don't think the sector fully appreciated some of the complexities in tackling such an issue, where cocoa is being produced in less developed countries. Most of cocoa is being produced by smallholder farmers who have a couple of hectares of land. They're not particularly, their cocoa farming practices are not modernized. There's not necessarily a lot of opportunities in these rural environments to generate additional income. And so what we actually realized is that some of the underlying factors affecting or creating vulnerability or risk of child labor, Neill, are poverty. Right. And so one of the things that we've been working on for a number of years, we are about to publish a Decade of Impact report together with our partner CARE, where we look at a lot of the prevention. So we've actually discovered that one of the ways in which you can reduce the risk of child labor is ensuring children are in school, but not just having bums on the seat, actually ensuring that the educational environment in which, let's say, is functional in a community, right? So there is a school, there's teachers, there's books, there's materials, children are enrolled. our data has shown that if children aren't enrolled in school, that is one of the major predictors that they might be actually involved on farm in at-risk activities, right? Hazardous child labor, which we would find intolerable. So I think one of the areas that we have been working on is the preventative approach. Another area of prevention that we've been working on is looking at how to increase household incomes, particularly for women. A lot of research we did with CARE a few years ago actually showed that women spend most of their income on family education and nutrition and on their children. So if you can actually get more money into the hands of women in the cocoa farming household, you will also see a reduction of risk factors for children to be in child labor. So all of those activities continue. We work with Empower Her, a new project that we started in Ivory Coast to actually train women entrepreneurial skills, give them access to and knowledge on financial literacy, so small business planning. And then depending on what they want to do, we do sort of a needs assessment survey. We then also introduce them into different technical skill development models we have. So if women tell us they want to grow livestock or poultry, we then say, okay, come work with our partners who can train you on those. If they say we want to do crafts, we then have a different sort of delivery model to introduce those women into sort of the craft making. And there's a number of, let's say, livelihood pathways that they can then choose from once they have the general, let's say, skill set to be able to manage their own economies. So that's one piece, the prevention, and the prevention needs to continue. The prevention is also very dependent on the governments that we partner with in these countries having, let's say, being able to execute on their own strategies for rural economies, right? In order for any of these income generating opportunities to be a success, there needs to be a market, right? So you also need to have small, medium enterprises such as farmer cooperatives that are willing to diversify and help women, for example, by off-taking their products and linking them to another market. So market access is also a strong element, and that also needs to be championed by working closely with the governments who are executing on, let's say, their socioeconomic plans for rural environments. That's one piece of work, and that needs to continue and will continue. Something that I think the sector has been very successful in the last few years has also been implementing what are commonly known as child labor monitoring and remediation systems. That's sort of a terminology for a broad concept, but the concept in itself aims at using data to target intervention. So what you do with a CLMRS system is you actually survey farmers and observe, and you do it in a way that isn't punitive. This, I think, is also quite important. There's been a noticeable shift in how we're tackling child labor. So now it's actually a good thing if you find child labor, in a sense, right? Because then you're able to identify where it's happening. You're able to understand why it's happening. Is it a household issue? Not enough money in the household? Is it a community issue? There's not, there is no school. There's no functional school in the community. What are the specific issues? And then you can basically put in place what is known as a remediation plan, which takes the data, takes the underlying causes, and then targets interventions to address that specific incidence. And then you go back after a period of time and you ensure that that's being remediated. And those are actually very powerful tools. We as Cargill actually have a CLMRS roadmap as part of our goal on community well-being. We implemented a roadmap to get us to 2025 to have all of our cocoa supply chain covered through CLMRS. And we're really excited. My colleague is leading this space. He's sort of our technical lead, and he's implementing different models across the different geographies. So what we do in Ivory Coast and Ghana is slightly different. And the reason we're also doing that is because by implementing different innovations and then participating in a learning agenda, such as the ones that ICI curates, the International Cocoa Initiative, we're actually able to understand what models are going to be more effective. And that will benefit not only Cargill in upscaling our approach, but it also will allow the wider sector, and back to your first question, it will allow our customers to get involved, because then we'll be able to understand here's a model that is scalable, and here's where you can actually invest to see that effective change. So I have a lot of confidence. I have a lot of respect for what we've done the past 10 years, knowing that when we started out, and this was before my time, perhaps the appreciation of the complexity wasn't there. I also have a lot of confidence in the progress that we're going to be making, just given the last few years, how rapidly we've been able to introduce these new models, and how much willingness there is, I think, amongst actors, especially in the cocoa sector, to share data, share learnings, provide that information to ICI so that they can really crunch the numbers for us and help us understand, what tweaks we can make to the systems to ensure that they're scalable, but also efficient, right? Because cost remains also an issue, right? Because these systems are somewhat new.
And that sort of leads me on to a point I was going to make about relating to the WCF meeting recently, in that one of the key takeaways from that was that the income gap for farmers is standing at around 10 billion, according to a new Mondelez report that emerged from those sessions. So how concerned are you that the introduction of the living income differential payments in terms of raising farmer payments is going to make a difference to those communities out there in West Africa?
Well, I think firstly, it goes without saying, Cargill supports and shares the goal that we need to have a robust global marketplace, and there needs to be strong incentives in place and more livelihoods for cocoa farmers. And I think that's generally accepted. And we as Cargill have been contributing through the crop 2021, both in what we buy from Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, including paying this living income differential, right? And we want to work closely with the governments of Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire to provide support, whether it's to the farmers or via the partner cooperatives or intermediaries through which we work. And I think we do believe that the lid has potential to impact farmers and their communities positively. The thing is, cocoa price is just one component. We very much fixate on this cocoa price, but actually, if you look at livelihoods and you look at the research that's being done, and I think hats off, Mondelez has brought that out there, and we're all looking at it. What we realize is that you can't just achieve a living income through one component. You really need to take that holistic approach. And diversifying incomes, whether it's on farm, alternatives to cocoa, off farm, what I call household incomes for young people and women, is going to be critical. I think also strengthening farmer organizations. We can't underestimate the importance of professionalizing small, medium enterprises in the value chain. They're really going to be the backbone of this. So, for example, the Cargill Co-op Academy program that we've been running for a number of years really focuses on co-op leaders and helping them have a strong business, right? And a value proposition and the skill set to run their businesses professionally. I think what we really need to be looking at as a sector is a strategy to accelerate and stimulate the diversification of rural economies. And it goes back to that point, right? And this isn't something that we're going to do ourselves. Cargill offtakes cocoa. We can do as much as we can in terms of the cocoa sphere. We can absolutely work with farmers so they have the tools to become agri-entrepreneurs, we call it. We can work with other household members so that they become entrepreneurs. But actually, we need to understand what kind of frameworks are needed for meaningful collaboration with and beyond cocoa. Right? We need to understand what other opportunities there are for livelihoods in those countries. We need to work with the origin country governments also to help them accelerate their strategies for rural socioeconomic resilience in rural environments. And we need to continue and step up what we're doing, the cross-sector sharing of data, the learnings, and then finally, we need to also ask farming communities what they want to do. So this is also not only about us saying, oh, you now need to achieve a living income, but we also need to provide choices to those smallholder families to be at their best. Whether it's, and asking the women, what kind of incomes do you want? Doing assessments. We work with IDH to run market livelihood assessments. So they come in as the technical partner and help us work with a cooperative and understand in that geography, in that area, what are some of what are some of the products or services that are of interest and that people would get paid for. So then we can also bring that in when we're talking to the women or the young people or the farmers and say, okay, this is the kind of thing that would be valued in your area. Can we work with you to develop the technical skills? So I think we're on the right track. I think we know what needs to be done. I think the cocoa sector is quite mature in its understanding of living income. I think we've done a number of benchmark exercises also with the living income community of practice, which tell us what the living income is. And so we can actually have the information around what this gap is that we need to fill. But now it's a question of putting into practice delivery models. And those delivery models will be done somewhat with the sector, but also need to be sort of coordinated also together with other initiatives to make sure that they're sort of sufficiently scaled and accelerated.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. That seems to be the scaling up was very much the theme
Yeah.
of the WCF meeting, was that the kind of vehicles for delivering change have been there in place for a number of years, but it's just reaching a whole lot more people than is presently happening. And that's no fault of industry, because, you know, you're one piece of the puzzle, and it's good to see that collectively businesses are taking a lot more responsibility now.
Each sector actor needs to reflect on the unique role that they can play and where they can bring most value. Complex issues that relate to human rights or child labor, forced labor, again, are not going to be solved alone. It's not going to be industry alone. These are very complex puzzles. I think there's an incredible role for consuming country governments to create a sense of urgency, and I think we definitely see that at an EU level. I think, you know, destination governments and where products are consumed, the governments need to encourage policy that can be operationalized. They need to continue to sensitize consumers and also provide technical and financial assistance where it's needed most, right? These are to the producing country governments who are effectively trying to implement a number of strategies. And the EU multi-stakeholder platform is a fantastic example and quite critical, I think, to bringing together all the stakeholders so that they can talk about these issues and understand how they can be addressed within the supply chain. I think we also need to acknowledge that producing country governments have national action plans. I mean, there are national action plans to address child labor, and there are a number of initiatives that are looking to raise standards of cocoa production. Standards in themselves actually can be a very important tool, right? If they're comprehensive and, to your point, complete in their definition, right? And have those strong implementation guidelines. I guess you also want to make sure that you still have consumers and CSOs that don't shy away from the issue and continue to raise, you know, concerns around social conditions of production, but also lean in and understand the nuance, like I think they are doing, and appreciate that this is the reality in which cocoa is produced and that we're all working in. And then I think you also need to appreciate, I think we all need to appreciate that we need to work with cocoa family households so they actually understand what the issue is and what the concerns are, right? I mean, the first few years of our work, we actually realized that often a lot of cocoa farming families didn't even appreciate that some of the elements that we in destination markets and consuming markets saw as a problem was actually an issue. This whole idea of what is hazardous child labor versus what is social work for children, you know, that wasn't necessarily, the difference wasn't entirely appreciated. So you also need to work with the families to understand their perspective and also help them understand, you know, what are some of these different definitions and what is acceptable versus less acceptable. You know, as a company, Cargill has a human rights policy, right? And we've made commitments on our cocoa supply chain through our strategic action plan. I mentioned the CLMRS roadmap. That's basically a main component of our strategic action plan. But maybe what we're talking about here is more related to initiatives such as mandatory due diligence. Yes. I think mandatory due diligence absolutely has a great potential to create a level playing field. I think it could give a lot of legal certainty to companies, you know, if it's applied equally across the value chain. And if we see it as a tool for continuous improvement and not an end state in itself, you know, I think, and allowing indeed for accountability of all those actors in the supply chain, then it can certainly serve a purpose, perhaps to address some of the concerns that are raised by CSOs, rightly so. However, let's be clear, like, for it to work, it's not enough for it just to exist. There needs to be that engagement and dialogue with the producing country governments, right? Because that's where the challenges really lie. That's where the understanding needs to be built. That's where the technical and financial support needs to be given. And then, I mean, you know, it's important that we recognize that due diligence alone will not generate all of the sustainability outcomes desired by the sector. So earlier you were talking about livelihoods and living income. I mean, due diligence can be a foundation, absolutely. It can address social and environmental concerns as they are relevant to different value chains. And that is a good step forward, and I think we would absolutely support that. but we continue to need things like public-private partnerships and what I was talking about earlier, an understanding of different strategies to stimulate socioeconomic resilience in rural environments, and that work will need to be continued. So it really needs to be under this auspice of sort of continuous improvement, and also looking at some of the other issues that we're also trying to address.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely noted from our perspective that there is genuine progress being made. It's just a question of scaling it up, which is, I think, acknowledged universally that needs to happen, and that's not an overnight process, and I'm sure you'll get there with it. And just looking to sustainability in general here, we have our World Confectionery Conference, which sustainability is going to be a key part of our event. So Cargill is very much welcome as a sponsor for our conference. So how important do you believe it is that we hold events like that to try and champion such issues in industry?
Very. I mean, I think the power of these events, whether they're in person or online, which isn't always easy to facilitate, is that they can convene. They can convene stakeholders. They can bring together, whether it's industry, government, civil society, other interested parties, farming communities, cooperatives, whoever it may be, but they convene around specific themes. So the WCF partnership meeting was one, where I think the event was able to focus us on various issues. I'm sure other conferences as well will have the same, let's say, power to bring people together, and I think they're definitely a testament to the commitment of the sector that wants to discuss these issues and drive forward the sustainability issues that the sector is trying to tackle.